Welcome. Siobhan Byrns is a professor of art and the chair of the art department here at the university since 2010. Her work with photography, installation, artist books, and digital media have been widely shown across the United States and have been featured internationally. Before coming to Lynchburg, she was the lead imaging artist at the Museum of the Art Institute of Chicago, assisting in the digital restoration of George Seurat's Assemblée at Le Grand Jatte. Numerous publications and media outlets have featured both her artistic pursuits and her conservation efforts, including NPR Marketplace, The Washington Post, and the Chicago Sun-Times. Her photography, installation work, and artist books are included in the collections of the Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago, the Roger Brown Collection, the Art Institute of Chicago, Appomattox Courthouse National Park, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Virginia, and private collections. In 2016, Sam Abel of National Geographic chose one of her images for his Images of the Year photo collection that was on view at the Torpedo Factory in Alexandria, Virginia. In 2017, one of her images received the Best of Show Award at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Virginia, New Waves 2017. In 2023, she will be exhibiting locally at Riverview's Art Space. We at the University Research Center are delighted for Siobhan to be continuing our lunchtime research presentations. I'm Professor Robin Bates. I'm a research fellow, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome our awesome colleague, Siobhan.
Okay, so I know we're on a time limit, so we're gonna have fun, and I scared another professor saying I have 138 slides. It's gonna work. So I think the big misconception that we have is that traditionally when you meet an artist, you think that there's a horrible misconception that we just kind of like use our own experiences and we don't place things in context. And so the title of this work, I'm gonna steal a concept from our new Professor Alan Bushton. I'm going to kind of go through this PowerPoint and this description of my work, kind of like a murder mystery. And we're going to end up basically seeing the way that I compose work. The title of this work is Senescence. Senescence typically gets confused sometimes with the idea of aging. It is something that happens to our cells where they both regenerate and die at the same time. It's most commonly, an easy, I guess, allegorical image for it is something like scars. And so this is kind of an introduction into my work. Okay, doesn't like that. All right. So many of you have probably seen me around campus. I'm well known for more historic processes. Some of you in this room have actually sat for me before. This is a tintype series I did at the faculty with a medium that I'm just a big fan of. The tintype was invented in the mid-1850s in Ohio. It's a natively American process, and it also had an amazing impact on culture. The reason being is anyone who could afford to have a photograph before this was of nobility. Tintypes leveled the playing field. They were cheap, they were inexpensive. You could go to a carnival, you could go to Atlantic City, and you could have your image reproduced. And so, especially in the United States, it really, really changed the way we see things. The part I also really love about this is that it's photographing on a blue light spectrum. Ooh, excuse me. And so I love this image. This is Corinne Jasinski. She's a very famous wedding photographer, but she did come here and she's one of our alumni. She is a blonde, fair-skinned girl in a blue dress holding lemons. I love this image to kind of talk about the way that tintypes absorb and reflect silver nitrate. If you look, it looks like she's holding like rocks, because yellow in the world of blue light spectrum actually translates to black. Blondes, so you can see where she's actually gone really dark, and blue becomes white. So she looks like she's wearing a white dress holding rocks. So what this does in the tintype process is it also alters the way that we're actually seeing the way that things get recorded. So I always get super pissed when they have those wonderful blogs of, hey look, I just colorized all these people. You did it wrong. Because they're not on the right color spectrum. So that's not actually how the colors came through. Traditionally, if you have a pair of blue eyes, they're going to photograph almost clear. So in this, I just want to say, make sure you're aware of this. With that work, this is another professor who works here. This is Grace Maddox. We were selected to be the lead artist for the 150th sesquicentennial at Appomattox Park, where we took a whole bunch of students to shoot multiple tintypes. But this is a process that I really, really love, and it's something that for me, I really enjoy the idea of the product at the end of it. With the age of digital, we tend to record and not actually think about what happens to the artifact of it. These, you instantly have a reaction. And so, this is a very old one, that's Harper and Dr. Silky. So many of you have actually come and sat for me in these portraits. But my journey with this actually started in 2010, and this is one of the first tintypes I ever took, and it really kind of changed the way that I was experiencing tintypes. So this is a tintype of a sculptor named Stacy Chin, where the actual water reacted with the chemistry. This was taken in Kentucky, where there's a very high content of limestone in the water, and so it reacted and kind of gave this wonderful ET chest. So I really started thinking about playing within like the idea of chemistry and how I could change that. And so when we do teach this process, this is Ken Rose, who was actually a physics major, I believe, who came and entered into this class and allowed them to kind of experience art through their own platform or where they're coming from within this. And this is a self-portrait. And you can see the other thing I wanted to point out is I always like showing this one simply because when you're photographing in this medium, we're using a basic lens. There is no mirror in the camera, so everything prints upside down and backwards. And so you'll notice on my apron, my name is backwards. That's going to come into effect later on from some of my major influences. This is some of the work that we printed at Appomattox. That's some of the gentlemen. The other area that really influences my work is digital conservation. So I was formerly trained as a painter in my undergrad, and it was something that I really loved. I loved the idea of seeing the world translating into how I perceived it. And when I went to graduate school, because my parents really wanted me to get a job, they made me study chemistry. And so I ended up doing a lot of work within conservation efforts and working within repairing two-dimensional surfaces, traditionally oil paintings. At the time, there was a need to restore the Grand Shot. The Grand Shot, George Seurat painted multiples of these. The largest one is in possession at the Art Institute of Chicago. There is a smaller one at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is an amazing view of pointillism, and it's a great expression of understanding color theory. The problem is that, like many artists, he was in his 30s and couldn't afford good paint. So certain pigments oxidized, and it really gave a dulling kind of look to it. So because it's considered a priceless piece of artwork, the only way we were allowed to touch it was if I worked with Christopher Gallagher and we photographed 8x10s of this huge piece. This is almost to scale of the piece. Reassembled it in Photoshop, remixed the pigments, and then recolored it. And so that took me 3 years. It was also, for those of you that like playing computers, it was on a G5 dual 533 sawtooth, which I think had 256 megahertz of RAM. So it was really a difficult process to kind of move through the template. This show went on exhibition, and it kind of started, it was definitely a catalyst, because it allowed people to start thinking about what was the artist's intent as far as pigments went. We've actually gone from this research onto some of Van Gogh's paintings. Next time you look at a Van Gogh, I want you to look at the whites. Most of them are traditionally purples. They are considered too priceless to physically restore, and so we print up photographs that hang alongside them, and these are the Durst lambdas of these. This is Dr. Inga Fiedler. She was my main conservator that I worked with to kind of color match and figure out how to print this as a 1-to-1 scale for the exhibition. For those of you that are interested in color science, Roy Byrns was one of the people that did the calculations with me. This is the color spectrum in the world of lab. Color, when we talk about hexadecimals or colors, we have an L factor, which is lightness, and then you have an A and B. Color is actually three-dimensional when you think about it in spectrum. And so we took this and made it this. So most of you will see the difference between that. We actually pulled the whites in. The result, and I tried to line these up, this is the original, and this became this. So the nice thing about that, and I'll do it again because it's kind of fun. So you can actually see, now I only focused on 3 colors. And they were the main colors that seemed to be oxidized. It was anything that had this kind of cadmium pigment in it. This is another area. It's a little bit better. You can see And traditionally, you can see what I'm focusing on is the oranges, the greens, and the yellows that are completely oxidized. And I'll just go through these quickly. You can see where it was. You can see we basically were taking syringes, remixing it chemically, and then painting it in Photoshop with an unaged filter on it. And we did that with green, yellow, and orange. So where does this tie into my work? One of the big things that I fought with in the Seurat project is that as a woman, we are not allowed to age in our society. And this idea of the same thing with painting. Why can't we actually allow this painting in the intent of the artist? Do we have to go with a pure concept, or should we allow it to actually die? Anyone who's taken my class knows that I have a huge problem with The Last Supper, simply because it was painted on a waterlogged fresco wall. It is meant to, it was not meant to be what it is now. Now I think there's like 10% of the original artist's intent on it, but because we are invested in the iconography of it, we won't let it fall apart. And so, again, as I said, I was trained as a classical painter. This is one of my favorite pieces of artwork, and this was a challenge that was proposed to me as an undergrad, was to actually see and break the stigmata of like, oh, I hate walking through the older sections of museums, like, why do we do this? And could you actually find an artist's intent within these kind of patrons? Patrons typically say, okay, I want you to paint me in the back with Jesus and make me look holy. And so I stumbled upon this one. This one's in DC. This is Jan van Eyck. This is the Annunciation. It's from 1434. I wasn't initially attracted to it because Gabriel's got rainbow wings. We tend to whitewash wings as we kind of go through the centuries, and we end up with these really bland dove wings. But for me, I was really, really attracted to that. And then as you get closer, you're going to notice something kind of wonderful about this. Please keep in mind, this is 1430s, okay? So we're talking medieval. My favorite part of this is I am very attracted to text. I love text art, I love Bart Kruger, and I noticed that there was text on it. Can anyone tell me what's weird about the text? So this is normal, kind of. And this is Gabriel saying, "Hail full of grace." This is the best part, ready? What's wrong with this text? Kara, it's upside down and backwards. Okay, so this, in this painting, so if you see this, when you see this reproduced, you're like, oh, it's just another boring Annunciation thing, right? So in this particular one, it's upside down and backwards. So Gabriel is normal. Can anyone tell me why they think that this is upside down and backwards? Okay, really? Okay, John McCormick gets points for saying it's a camera obscura, because we will actually say that photography was used as a tool, but not acknowledged as an art form, so you get a half bonus point for that, but that's not the right answer. Okay, Van Eyck believed that God was sitting on a cloud, and he was going to communicate directly with God about this painting, and he wanted him to acknowledge, like, you've chosen Mary as your handmaid. So God, sitting on a cloud, had to flip himself over to read the painting. Okay, 1434. Okay, so not only is he amazing at color, but he's also conceptually saying, okay, you sent Gabriel, you know what he sent. He can leave it alone. Mary, her answer, just so you're aware, even though this has already happened, we're going to turn you upside down and backwards so that you can actually read this. Here's the best part. I have lots of best parts. So we have this, and she replies, behold the handmaid of the Lord. Okay? He does this again in the Ghent altarpiece. So he painted with his brother. This is again 1432. And this was painted before it. But it doesn't get as much attention because we typically see this altarpiece as a portable altarpiece. Made famous by the George Clooney movie of Monuments Men. It existed before that, believe me. When you pull these closed, so we have all these patrons and all this stuff going on over here, here's the fun part. Again, Van Eyck is actually painting the Annunciation again, so same scene. He did it again. So again, we're noticing this behavior of him, that he really feels like he's communicating with a higher form, right? But the higher form is definitely sitting on a cloud, definitely going upside down, okay? Now, this kind of stuff I really find very intriguing because we tend to say like, oh, well, we are going to separate, death of the author. There is no author. There is no contribution. Artists are vessels. We are pathways. The meaning, you can have your meaning, but we're going to culturally have a different meaning for it. And so I think that when I start looking for these things in art, and again, it says the same thing, I am behold the handmaid of the Lord. It's something that I really, for me, talks about the experience of where we are as artists and what we're trying to communicate with good. So last summer, I had the honor of being a recipient from the Council of Independent Colleges to go study at Oberlin College at the Allen Memorial Museum. And the goal of this was to talk about medieval art and how we can make it exciting again. And so knowing that I really liked Van Eyck, I was like, all right, I'll go. And I also had an alternative motive. We also talked about a lot about the conservation and how much is too much. This is at the Cleveland Museum of Art, looking at pieces of, this is a piece that was at a monastery, and this was actually stolen and sold separately because a lot of times there's so much art in parts of Europe, they don't think of it the same kind of preciousness that others do. Like archaeology definitely had an invention date. But it was really nice to actually see a small liberal arts college with an amazing collection, to the point that they're double hanging like Barocchios. So all of this work is kind of in this world. This is a group of art historians. There's 2 artists, myself and one other graphic designer, that are looking at through, this is UV or blue light. We tend to use this in order to see what has been done as an after effect or what has not aged at the same rate, discussing this work. And the other point that I really liked is that the Allen Memorial Collection actually has a plethora of information on ephemeral art. And ephemeral art is one of my all-time favorite things. So this is Bernini's ephemera display. And this is one that's talking about what they would do for celebrations is they would create artwork. Think of it as like a parade float. They would create for weddings, for major feasts. These are like paper mache artifacts that don't exist anymore. The only way we have proof that they exist is we have letters or we have small prints like these. These are actually from London and Stockholm. But these pieces typically, they were, this one, you can kind of tell with the flames. These are fireworks that come out of a wonderful display of 2 angels with the king on top. But it gets more exciting. This one is one of my favorite ones. So this is the Circle of France. This was very similar to a parade. This is a ship that was constructed for art, for art and for kind of a public display. What they did was they actually put live cats inside the boat and then set it on fire. Because they really wanted the cats screaming to actually talk about the battle being kind of won in the conquering aspect. If you want, I do have the literature on it. It's kind of exciting and kind of different. The other aspect of this that I was more interested in, you can tell I'm not really that invested in this, was the ceremony of the void, which I really think in retrospect I should probably name my next body. It is something that we do with ephemera where we actually create sugar sculptures. Sugar sculptures were presented, typically it started out as a medieval feast that would happen. We call it the ceremony of the void because after you've had your banquet, you would typically clear the banquet so that you could have your dancing and drinking, but everyone would be asked to leave, and they actually would construct these 2 separate towers or separate rooms on major estates where you would go, have a drink, and look at these sugar sculptures and even break off pieces of them, but they were considered artworks of art. Traditionally now, we don't call it the ceremony of the void. It came more in fashion to call it the French word to dessert. So there's the Jeopardy fact of the day. The word dessert is actually from the medieval feast, ceremony of the void. What we did with this is part of the Making and Knowing project that was launched of 2020. We found recipes for these sugar sculptures at Oberlin, and a whole bunch of art historians and myself sat around trying to recreate these sugar sculptures. There was a beautiful display of these in 2015 in Florence, so you can see that these were typically done of works of art that were either recast sculpture, and these were done with plaster casts so that they could be created. You can see the absolute intricacy and some of these beautiful. This is a replica of one that's outside of the Capitoline Museum in Rome. These were set up in amazing feasts where you can actually see where people have gone to have the ceremony of the void and leave. Another example. These are 2 buildings that have definite, you can actually see, this is where, so you'd have your banquet, and then you would depart to these 2 separate buildings, or in this one over here, to have this kind of active ephemera created so that you could have this active beauty and then destroy it, okay? The other thing is just another Jeopardy fact. This is Laycock Abbey. This is where William Henry Fox Talbot would eventually invent the negative, and most of you have actually seen this. This is Hogwarts in the movie Harry Potter, okay? All right, so back to the work. So we're mixing gum arabic and egg to kind of create this bonding agent that you can eat within the sugar. Mine didn't turn out so well. So we tried a slightly different line. So this is molten sugar, so we melted it down to try and get it to stay. It was air conditioned, but it definitely did not stay as well as I would like. So this also should be considered like the lecture of like epic fails in the attempt for artwork. But you can see where we're making the mold. We've got the plaster mold, we cast it, and we tried actually doing it from the 1430s recipe. We know that there is alginate and other amazing things now that we could cheat with, but we really wanted to try and stick to this. And so this is our lemon. Lemons are not perfectly symmetrical, so we actually had to like really wrestle this thing out. But we did end up getting a lemon. And so this is what would be typically decorated on those parade feasts and that kind of, in those banquets of the void. It's not a bad lemon. It melted. All right, so a modern take on this. We're also seeing a lot of artists using this sugar and this subtlety. You have to talk about Kara Walker when you're going to talk about this. So this is Subtlety from 2014. This is bleached sugar that was done in the shape of a sphinx. This was done in New York in the old Domino Sugar factory. So for scale, you can see how monumental this is. This work really focused on the idea that we tend to associate the abuses done to African people within the cotton trade in the United States, and we're forgetting about what was done for sugar. And so a lot of this work that is coming up discusses it. This is a picture of her. She is currently a professor at Columbia University, and this is one of her sugar pieces. She's probably more well known for her silhouette work that most of you are probably better familiar with seeing. There is other artists. This is Maria Magdalena Campos Potts. This is a piece that was up for view. This is also made of the subtlety stuff, so this is the byproduct of sugarcane, used to talk about, again, the other injustices. This is called Bittersweet. This is from 2010. This was an installation view at JMU. Ephemera's Portrait. So again, playing off these ideas that we create art in order to destroy it. Most of you are very familiar with Botticelli. Birth of Venus is probably its most iconic one. But this is, again, the Primavera for springtime. These women are in cloth. This is an ephemera dress. This dress was created out of flowers. It was made to be destroyed or kind of spring awakening, kind of in the idea of lust, of the creation of beauty. You'll also see, this is an artist that I'm very interested in right now. This is Fabiola Jean-Louise. She is doing the same thing. These are completely made out of paper. These are dresses where she is creating an idea of Afrofuturism within a parallel context of what is happening in this kind of older European thing. Most of you are familiar with the stuff that was going, like I think it's Netflix, Bridgerton, right? That's Afrofuturism, okay? That's the easiest way to explain it to students. So what she's doing in this, so this is, they'll say we enjoyed it. Again, you have a woman who's completely done up in nobility kind of gear. And then in the background, you have just a pictorial image of some of the atrocities. This is one of my favorite ones by her. These are exhibited both as sculptures and photographs. So this is her Madame Beauvoir's painting. You can see on it, she's actually commenting on Macpherson and Oliver's The Escaped Slave Peter, where she's actually printed that, she's worked it in, but then she's also embroidered the scars on the back of the dress. Again, please keep in mind this is all paper. And this is, I always laugh at this piece because it does not have his name. Macpherson and Oliver, when he escaped and made it to Baton Rouge, to a Union camp, they never got his last, he didn't have a last name, but they have no other information other than the fact that his name is Peter. So this was kind of used as propaganda in the North to actually get the North engaged in what was happening within slavery, but we have very little information of the gentleman. This is another piece of hers, We Cannot Be Conquered. This is Conquistador 1, and then Marie Antoinette is dead. Looking at these pieces, she does always kind of hide aspects of kind of the message that she's trying to get through. She's either paying homage to Africans who have definitely pioneered, as well as atrocities against them, but puts them in this kind of push-pull aspect. This I really wanted to show because this is an installation view. So typically if you go, you will see the images I just showed you will be mounted to look like paintings in order to kind of create that Afrofuturism, but these are entirely of paper. And this is the particular piece from the Conquistador 1. And then this is the background of that piece, you can see like she does not cut corners. This is all meant to be. These are traditionally, she makes them and then has to insert the model into them, thus destroying parts of them, and then she takes them out and exhibits them. So when they are exhibited, they look slightly different, and people have always commented on that, but it's the fact that this is paper. She's breaking them to get them in, she's breaking them to get them out. This one was damaged, so this one you will see on the Madame Leroy here, and you can see that that centerpiece, basically the whole front of the dress, could not be preserved. So she also goes down to the shoes. So this is something that she is completely and fully investing in. Traditionally, to get her models in and out of them, she does kind of a lattice on the back or corseting to get them in. And some of them she has not created full artwork for. This is a woman who's only had about 4 shows also. So please understand, like you're gonna hear about her later on. She is definitely gonna be a mover and a shaker in the art world. Most recently, she was part of a group show on Afrofuturism at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and she's working on an exhibition right now. And this is kind of a nice one to see too. This is the Marie Antoinette is Dead. When you can actually, on close-up, she definitely hides it in the photographs where you're not really seeing how much of this handwork is going on, but it is all paper. So, miniatures. This is also something that I really rediscovered while I was at Oberlin. Miniatures were signs of affection. This is a form of artwork that was traditionally done for nobility. It was never meant to be permanent. These are mostly watercolors on vellum. They're no more than about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. Traditionally, if you were having a love affair with someone, you would have their portrait. You would have your portrait painted, and you would wear it on the inside of your shirt. So you can kind of like look at it and remember what you might be doing that evening. These were traditionally something that was passed around with nobles. However, these are what we consider when we talk about them. So you have very decorative, very wealthy people with their names. There's more fun out there. This is one of my favorite pieces. This is Portrait Mentor of an Unknown Man, but there's flames. He's also got a little bit more of a revealing kind of look for him going on here. This is not entirely in its own universe. We have multiples of these gentlemen and women with flames and lust and flowers going around. Because remember, this is private. This is not meant to have been in a museum or shared. And so this is Man Consumed by Flames, 1610. Again, still working around the same time as some of the others. This also moved on, like, oh, it's too revealing to know who this person is. So we started going, the soul lies in the eyes, right? So miniature started evolving into just getting a little bit of the person's eye and maybe a curl of their hair. So you can kind of be like, no, that's not so-and-so, that's just a piece. So this is probably where it evolved into trying to hide. We know about 1,000 of these that are in existence. This is a ring, and then this is also a pin. My favorite part of this is actually a piece that is very well known. It's part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's called Beauty Revealed, and this was done by Sarah Godich. And this was a piece where this is her and her lover. This is Daniel, he's a lawyer. She was about 40 years old, his first wife dies, and they had been lovers for about 15 years. So she naturally assumed, he's gonna marry me. And he doesn't. He picks up a nice New York heiress. She decides to break up the love affair, but not before giving him one final look at her breast that he could walk around with. He kept these with him up upon his death in a jewelry box. And so, direct purchase to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we know that it's kind of a nice, fun flip of power within revenge porn in that one, where it's like, you don't get to touch these anymore. So I give props to her. She was an amazing artist who we don't have enough information about. But this also led me back to Oberlin. Oberlin had just recently acquired this particular piece. And this is Giovanni Garzoni. This is a portrait of Zaga Christ. The really unique thing about this, it's the first documentation of an African man in traditional nobility wear. This again is measuring about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. No one knew it existed until about like 6 years ago. It gets better. It's painted by a woman. At this time, women were not allowed to be painters. And this is a woman, Giovanni, was a court painter. This is a self-portrait of her. A portrait of her by Carlo. She was traditionally a court painter. She did a lot of flowers, a lot of vegetables, but then she also had a kind of a side career where she was painting these miniatures in court. This is a portrait of her. This is self-portrait as Apollo. It is also kind of fun to think of her that she's actually like regendering herself in this portrait. We also know that she puts the lute in there. At the same time that's working is Artemisia Gentileschi. Some of you might be familiar with her. She tends to kind of represent like women working in the field at that time because we were not allowed to be. So you can see they're working at similar times and similar styles. Artemisia definitely has a much better hand in it, but still, the fact that she's in a court and she's kind of got in there because of her dad, it's interesting to see. Artemisia Gentileschi, this is one of her more notable works. This is Judas slaying Holofernes. She's always kind of pictured because the people are always, how do I say this? This is a very violent picture for a woman in the 1600s to be painting. So she tends to get pigeonholed in this kind of like repressed woman, like angry. But you have to realize in context like what she was going through. So her dad was a painter. She would take lessons from him, kind of launched her own career within that, but then was definitely a victim of sexual violence on multiple counts. When she finally brought her accuser to court, they broke all her fingers. So it definitely did not work out really well for her in a couple of things of her artistic practice. Fun fact about this, the recent explosion that happened, they just discovered another one of hers, and I can't think of where it happened. Sorry, sidetrack on that, I'll come back to that, but they just recently discovered another painting of hers. So back to the Zacher Christ. So this was actually kind of an interesting piece too, because when this was acquired by Oberlin College, it was actually picked up on a Sotheby's site by their art history professor and was purchased for not a lot of money, and it's considered a priceless piece of art right now. And it is part of their collection. Because it is watercolor on vellum, it is not on display that often, so if you ever hear of it going up, you should definitely check it out. So this brings me finally into my work. So the title of my work is the Corinthian Maids Collection. The story of the Corinthian maid is how we actually like to describe in Greek mythology the way that painting was first created. The maid, her lover is sitting by the fire, he falls asleep, he's about to leave for war, and she decides to take a piece of chalk and she traces his image on the wall. We believe that this is the first representation, or how we like to describe the invention of painting. We know that it was before that, but still, I like this idea. And so this kind of is several years of work in different processes that I am putting into one. So this is work that was done within Eastman House, Penumbra, and Oberlin. This is where I was coming from. So when I was hired here, I pretty much identified as an installation artist. This is 500,000 insect pins and handmade rose petals and real rose petals. I had a video, but I could not find it in time for this lecture. The wall would kind of vibrate as you walked by it, but it would eventually die and say almost. This is another piece that was up in Chicago. This is I Love You, and it would die to say I Owe You. So I've always had this kind of attraction to plants and the idea of ephemeral nature of objects. This is an archival print from a performance of killing plants with paint. I also love the idea of within the Queen of Hearts, we having a lot of the writing in Alice in Wonderland kind of talking about the Catholic Church. Up at Penumbra, I love this group of individuals. These are a whole bunch of photographers and imaging artists that are trying to solve problems with analog techniques. This is us actually playing with platinum, which is one of the mediums that I really love. I think the thing that I really struggle with in my artwork is that as kind of the conservative brain in me finds more stable ways to create images that are going to last forever, what deserves the right to last forever? And so within the production of my work, I always kind of wrestle with that. This is a digital image in platinum. And then this, at the end of the research that we typically do, you can see multiple different negatives in multiple different mediums that we've kind of played with. This is the work that I did with the Syrian refugee crisis. This was commenting, I was, at the time, I had just had my first child, and I was sitting there thinking about baptism and water and all this stuff, and then the bodies of the children and the refugees were washing up on shore after people would slice open the boats. And so it really kind of hit me, the pictures of just artifacts that were laying on this, like what would you carry with you, and what would be washed up on shore, the duplicity of what water is supposed to be this baptismal thing and cleansing, and yet it is also a tool of death. And so this is what the water took from us. This was a series of cyanotypes. They're one-to-one prints of religious clothing. This is a girl's baptismal gown. This is a wedding dress. And this was one that was shown up in Boston, Massachusetts. I've also been able to do some research with the TLC Foundation and other faculty development grants. Tintypes are traditionally done with sunlight. and so there's definitely been a quest to create them with strobes. And so this is a very friend of mine, Sam Dole, who is sitting for me with a Vader hat on because I wanted to see how black would be represented in tintypes. We're generating almost 3 minutes of sunlight in 1/250th of a second in order to create indoor tintypes. Again, you can see the backwards, and when I was focusing on it, it'd be upside down. So again, pulling it back to the Van Eyck. A lot of the work is about failure. This is a piece that was at Eastman House. This was taking the same collodion process and doing it on glass to make multiples. I have had successes with it, but one of the things I like talking about in art is the fact that a lot of my stuff does not work out. And so these are negatives that look like positives simply because they're on a black background, but they're in the rinsing process. And then this is a wax skull print from a collodion negative, so I did figure it out. And so you can actually see the detail in it. The reason I love tintypes is they're on par with daguerreotypes as far as most of the digital cameras that we shoot with right now, the sensitivity is at about ISO 80, which means that's where the pixels are picking up light. Daguerreotypes and tintypes are at 1. So if you were to examine in, and so this is a self-portrait of me, if this was photographed and not seen through a digital lens, you can actually see the camera in my eye. So you're talking about incredible accuracy. And a lot of my students will say, like, okay, well, if you have that much accuracy, why don't we do this? And I'm going to quote The Incredibles too, because I have kids. We will always give away convenience for quality. And so we have moved into a digital platform where it is way easier to shoot digital than to go with analog, even though analog had the higher quality. This is a series that was done. This is called The Window. It is a very pretty image, but from a scientific point of view, this was an almost impossible image because you're indoors. The exposure was a friend of mine, and thank God she had the glass to rest her head on because this was about 11 minutes that she had to stand there. So also the idea of time within this medium is really interesting. Another series. So that's another piece from that series. Most recently, if you came to the faculty show, this is some of the work that I was doing in platinum. And as again, I say conservation-wise, platinum is more stable than any other medium we've ever discovered. So this is stuff that will be lasting for generations. And what I wanted to actually talk about, I had no idea, because again, what deserves that? And I talked, within a community, it's something that I dealt with that I never thought I was going to have to deal with. And so I wanted to photograph and kind of combine it. And so these are actually, platinum prints are actually black and white. These are actually fused with 24 karat gold because some of the hormones that you have to take per ounce are almost more expensive than gold. So this piece was kind of a combination of that to also talk about the struggles and the fact that this is not a one-off. These are daily doses that a community of people have to endure. And so if you were at the faculty show, a lot of it kind of paralleled aging and what is age, and what is fertility and what is it to be a woman. And the newest work that I am playing off of, which is what the Corinthian Maid is kind of focusing on, is kind of a cumulative, like kind of pull of everything. These are Spirituella prints. They're called anthrotypes. They are what I was proposing for a Fulbright with. These are light-sensitive chlorophyll prints. I am not the first person to be doing this. Ackroyd and Harvey are two British artists that have done this within clay and grass, where you can get kind of beautiful, beautiful detail. And then there is also Binh Da, who is a Vietnamese artist who is doing chlorophyll prints of artifacts that he is finding from the Vietnam War and printing them on hosta leaves. And these are my experiments. And so this is my office. These are Chinese money plants. These are prints. This is a world tour of glass negatives that I was gifted and told to do something with. They're not really of any value yet. Again, I always think about the content after I think about the process. So I was just kind of experimenting within these processes. If you come by my office, you can see they're still up there. And then here's the result. So you can see, this is only a 3-week test. So this is about 30 hours of full sun UV being exposed into the plant. I've made modifications now where I keep the plant alive by using little water vials in order to print these on. But this, for me, is very much the same size as one of the miniatures. And so I think where the piece and these pieces are going is kind of to emulate the same concept of the preciousness of me being obsessed with meaning and this kind of translation of that. Oh, sorry, wrong way. That one. And so that's, again, I see something there, so I'm really excited. These will eventually be preserved in resin. I do have one test that I have preserved in resin, and it disappeared after 3 days because I realized that I forgot to put UV stabilizer in it. So this is the only existence of it. So I think what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at resins like surfboard resins and boat resins because those actually preserve pigments on extreme UV or blue light spectrums. And so hopefully these will be preserved. This is the fail. It also got an air bubble in it. The air bubble didn't show up for 3 or 4 days, so my show is not until like September, so I have time. And that's kind of the murder mystery of everything from the 1400s and ephemeral art to Fabiola Jean-Louise and the influence on my art. I would love to field any questions if I haven't terrified you at this point. Kathleen.
You need to sell this plant. Yeah, I'm just saying, as your resident Shark Tank, that people love plants now. And that's a beautiful way to sell something else they don't need. So.
Well, it's funny because a friend gifted me some plants and we were discussing that I'm getting better results when the plants are still alive. So the fact that I'm like taping negatives and torturing plants and tattooing them, like, I'm not sure what that says about me.
Work on that marketing message.
I might have to twist that ever so slightly. Yes,
The
Kara.
artist that was using the paper to create the dresses, was she making the paper from scratch also, or using a combination of found materials, or what? A little bit more about like her materials. Do you know more?
So I don't know if she's making her own. I know that if she on Instagram right now, she's making her own paper sculptures. So she's manufacturing that for the upcoming show. Of the Rewriting History series, I'm not completely sure. It looks when you look at the actual dresses,
Because it's got so much texture. It looks like it's.
Let me go back. I don't know if I can go back. Hold on. I hate PCs. Okay. Let's go back to Fabiola. So when I look at her, I'm going to look at the Marina Twin X. I think that's one of the better details of it. So when I'm looking at this looks too even in texture for me. She hasn't, again, she's only had 4 shows and 1 group show. So this is an artist who is like really, really new on the scene. So on her website, it doesn't say. I have reached out to her to talk to her about like, how do we get exhibits like this? This is, really amazing stuff. But then looking at the way she's doing this, I want to say that the paper's really uniform. However, on her Instagram, you can see she is layering up and creating these very, very like 1500s type sculptures for it. Another view of it. And I did go through 138 slides in 3 minutes. Dr. Harrington.
I wanted to ask about some of those painted miniatures. Is that one of those pictorial categories where we see more women creating them as well?
I
see
think
more women artists?
so. I want to say that it tends, just from knowing what like Siobhan was doing, and the plethora of men, that might just be their sexual appetite. There might be some, we don't know who, as far as like, man on man, man on woman kind of things, especially with the flames. I'm not sure, like when you're thinking about that. So I think there's a whole rabbit hole to definitely go into, because I think that these ones have stories that I'm really, really interested in. The other thing that I really love about them is the idea that the most lasting part of it is the actual frame. Like this is vellum, like this is like tissue paper that they're painting on. So this, oh gosh, my partner's coming home, quick, destroy it, done. Like these were not tokens that were meant to last. So the fact that we actually, as far as documentation, even of the rings, like there's 1,000 of these in existence that we know of, like that's mind-blowing to me because these were, this one tends to be a little bit more anonymous, but I love, I feel like artistically on this particular one, like this is really great to kind of include this where you're like, this is totally so-and-so. Those little tidbits, but again, wanting to keep that more precious and more sacred and more kind of there. This would have been something worn on the inside where the ring was almost like flagrant, kind of out there. I just find it really fascinating. And so the other thing that when I typically talk about this, and you guys don't have to say this, but if you guys turn on your phones right now, how many of you actually have a picture of your partner or your kids on it? Like, we do this now as a behavior. I have my kids. I didn't bring my phone up here, but I got my kids on there. So there's my miniature, and I keep it in my back pocket, and I don't like send it out to the world. So these behaviors that we're documenting with this, and again, it's going to be probably changed in 6 months when they age up. Like, we do these things. The other thing we do is we forget about the artifact, because right now probably most of you have about 20,000 pictures on your phone and you haven't printed a painting in the last 6 months. So we are kind of losing this idea of the artifact within this. So I'm very much into printing this. How are we using this culturally? How are we documenting it? Jeff.
I found the documentation of the ephemera really interesting, because I just hadn't thought of that being a phenomenon, or anybody.
The sugar, or you like the cats being burnt alive?
More the cats. I mean, I don't like it, but I found that to be interesting. Yeah, just sort of like these types of happenings or events, or the fireworks display. Yeah, that one. So the people who were creating the event, like the phenomenon, not the drawing done after the fact, were they considered? I mean, were those done by artists?
This guy's a rock star. Bernini, like,
okay.
If you guys ever go
Oh,
to
he did fountains, didn't he?
Well, he did fountains, he did insides of churches, but he's known for the Japanese Apollo, that's the three-dimensional, like, where her fingers are out of marble or becoming, like, it's at the Borghese Gallery in Rome.
Okay.
Like, he is a rock star. So
okay.
This is a drawing of him being a rock star.
But, right, now my question is, like, does King Gustav or whoever call up Bernini and say, hey, I'm having a
probably
big bash in my house? Okay.
But it was also, there's documentation in these letters that people would rush these to grab pieces of them, to like almost being like, oh, I was at that like Kiss concert, like, oh, I was at the Bernini, like I have a piece of it. So a lot of these talking about the mob mentality within this, because again, this was something that was done out into common people in order for them to be part of this big celebration. We see it now with like, especially in England, where they like, here's a plate commemorating like 50 years of the throne. Like, it just different ways of it. But this was something that doesn't get mentioned enough, because we think about permanence and we think about, oh, this is going to last forever.
That's in my 17th century art background. Bernini was also a theater designer as well, so he really brings this theatrical aspect too.
Fireworks and flames.
Yes. He's definitely thinking about the spectacle and people responding to that.
Fireworks and Flames is actually Siobhan's Instagram handle.
Fireworks and Flames. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I hope this led you into kind of, how artists actually do the research and where it kind of comes into the creation point. So thank you for coming.